The white among golds. The desert of Karis stretched farther than memory, a vast ocean of sand where the wind carved shifting waves that never stayed the same for long. From the highest dunes, the land seemed alive, rolling, breathing, reshaping itself beneath a relentless sky. The sun hung above like an unblinking eye, pouring down heat so intense that even the air shimmered, bending the horizon into illusions. To most, Karis was a graveyard. Water was scarce, shade rarer still, and the temperature swung between extremes, burning by day, freezing by night. Storms could swallow entire regions without warning, burying anything that lingered too long. Even the hardiest travelers avoided it. But the Sarathi did not avoid Karis. They thrived in it. Beneath the dunes, hidden from the worst of the sun, stretched vast networks of tunnels, intricate, ancient, and carefully maintained. The Sarathi carved their homes deep into the sand where the temperature remained stable, where moisture could be conserved, and where predators could not easily reach. They were creatures of adaptation. Their scales were the color of sunlit sand, each hatchling born with a golden sheen that reflected just enough heat while blending perfectly with their surroundings. When danger approached, they could bury themselves in moments, disappearing into the dunes as if they had never been there. To survive in Karis was to be invisible. Anything that stood out did not last long. The Sarathi had learned this lesson over countless generations. It was not cruelty that shaped their customs, but necessity. At least that was what they told themselves. Deep within one of the largest brood nests, a cluster of eggs lay half buried in warm sand. They pulsed faintly, absorbing the carefully regulated heat that would bring them to life. Around them, several elders kept watch, their long bodies coiled in patient stillness, their golden eyes unblinking. Hatching was always a sacred moment. Each new life strengthened the brood, ensured its continuation. Each hatchling represented survival, another generation ready to endure the unforgiving desert. The air in the chamber was thick with anticipation. One egg trembled. A faint crack appeared along its surface. The nearest elder leaned closer, nostrils flaring as it sensed the life within stirring. Another crack followed, then another until the shell began to give way. The sound echoed softly through the chamber, drawing the attention of others. Heads turned, bodies shifted. A new hatchling was about to emerge. With a final, fragile effort, the shell split open. A small shape pushed through, its movements weak but determined. Tiny claws grasped at the broken edges as it dragged itself free, collapsing onto the warm sand. For a moment, there was silence. The hatchling breathed. It blinked slowly, its vision unfocused as it took in the world for the first time. Instinct guided it, it lifted its head, opened its mouth, and released a soft, chirping sound. A call, a plea, a declaration of life. The elders did not respond. They did not move. They only stared. Because the hatchling was not golden. It was white. The color was unmistakable. Where every other Sarathi bore scales that mirrored the dunes, rich golds, muted browns, subtle gradients that blended perfectly with the desert, this hatchling shone like a fragment of the moon fallen into the sand. Its scales were pale, almost translucent, catching the light in a way that made it seem almost luminous. Instead of absorbing the sun's glare, they reflected it, casting faint glimmers across the chamber walls. Its eyes, too, were wrong. Not the deep amber or gold of its kin, but a soft, unsettling violet that seemed too bright, too exposed. Too visible. The hatchling chirped again, louder this time, unaware of the tension filling the chamber. It struggled to its feet, unsteady, fragile, and took a small step forward. It expected warmth. Instead, it felt something else. Distance. One of the elders recoiled slightly, its body pulling back as though the hatchling carried some unseen danger. It will be seen, the elder hissed, its voice low but sharp. Another shifted uneasily, it shines. It cannot hide, a third added, not in the dunes, not under the sun. The hatchling paused, its head tilting as it sensed the change in the air. It did not understand words, but it understood tone. It understood that something was wrong. It chirped again, softer now. A question. No one answered. The elders gathered, forming a loose circle around the hatchling but keeping their distance. Their movements were deliberate, cautious, their gazes never leaving the pale creature at the center. This is not natural, one said. All hatchlings vary, another replied, though without conviction. Not like this. Silence followed. The desert demanded conformity. Every trait the S-Sarathi possessed had been shaped by it, refined through countless generations of survival. Their coloration, their instincts, their behaviors, all of it served a single purpose: to endure. Anything that did not serve that purpose was a risk. The albino hatchling shifted, its small body trembling as it tried to make sense of the growing unease. It took another step forward, then another, instinctively moving toward the nearest elder. Seeking comfort. Seeking acceptance. The elder hissed sharply, pulling back. The hatchling froze. It will draw predators, the elder said, its voice rising slightly. Even buried, it will reflect light it cannot hide. It will expose the brood, another added. It is a liability. It is a threat. The words came more quickly now, overlapping, reinforcing each other. The hatchling did not understand the meaning, but it understood the intent. Rejection. It lowered itself closer to the sand, its body flattening instinctively as though trying to disappear. But it could not. Even in stillness, it stood out. There were laws among the S-Sarathi. Ancient, unbroken. One of those laws forbade the killing of a hatchling. Life once given was not to be taken, not by their own kind. But there were interpretations. Alternatives. The eldest among them finally spoke, its voice cutting through the murmurs. It cannot remain. Silence fell immediately. No one challenged the statement. To keep it is to endanger all, the elder continued. The desert does not forgive weakness. The hatchling made a small sound, almost inaudible. It will not survive, one of the younger elders said, uncertain. Then the desert will decide, the eldest replied. That too was law. The desert judged all. The decision was made. The hatchling was lifted gently, but without warmth. Clawed hands supported its fragile body, careful not to harm it, yet devoid of any tenderness. It chirped weakly, confused, but too exhausted to resist. The tunnels stretched ahead, winding paths that led upward toward the surface. Toward the sun. The air grew hotter as they ascended. The protective coolness of the brood nest faded, replaced by dry heat that pressed against the hatchling's sensitive skin. It squirmed slightly, discomfort growing. Still, no one spoke to it. No one reassured it. At last they reached the surface. The light was blinding. The hatchling let out a startled cry as the sun struck its pale scales. The brightness seemed sharper, harsher, reflecting off its own body and into its eyes. It tried to burrow instinctively, but the sand here was loose, unstable. It could not find purchase. The elder carrying it moved away from the main nest, across the dunes, until the entrance to the brood's tunnels was no longer visible. Far enough. Safe enough. The hatchling was placed atop a dune. For a brief moment it lay there, blinking, trying to orient itself. Then it looked up. The elder was already turning away. The hatchling chirped louder now, urgent. A call to returns. A call for help. The elder did not stop. It did not look back. And then it was gone. The desert was silent. Not truly silent, there was always the whisper of wind, the shifting of sand, but there was no presence, no movement, no familiar warmth. The hatchling was alone. It did not understand why. Its instincts told it to follow, to seek the safety of the brood, but there was no trail it could follow, no scent it could track. Only endless dunes. It tried to move. Each step was difficult, its small limbs sinking into the loose sand. The heat burned against its underside, seeping into its body, draining what little strength it had. It chirped again. No answer came. The sun climbed higher. Time passed, though the hatchling had no way to measure it. The heat became unbearable. Its body, not yet adapted to the extremes of Karis, struggled to cope. Its pale scales reflected the sunlight, but they also exposed it. There was no place to hide, no shadow to retreat into. Instinct screamed at it to burrow. To disappear. It tried. It scraped at the sand with its tiny claws, digging frantically, but the grains slipped and shifted, collapsing back into place. It lacked the strength, the technique, the experience. It could not dig deep enough. It could not escape. Its movements slowed. Its chirps grew weaker. Hours stretched on. The hatchling's body began to fail. Dehydration set in, its throat dry, its energy nearly gone. Its vision blurred, the bright world around it fatting at the edges. The wind picked up, carrying fine grains of sand that stung against its exposed skin. They gathered around it, slowly burying its limbs, its tail. It did not resist. It could not. It lay there half-covered, its breathing shallow. Alone, as the sun began to descend, the temperature shifted. The intense heat gave way to a creeping cold. The desert, which had burned by day, now began to freeze. The hatchling shivered. Its body, already weakened, struggled to adapt to the sudden change. Its muscles trembled, its breaths coming in short, uneven bursts. It curled slightly, trying to conserve warmth. But there was nothing to shield it. No brood. No nest. No safety. Only the vast, indifferent desert. The sky burned orange, then red, then deepened into shades of purple as the sun sank below the horizon. Shadows stretched across the dunes. The hatchling's eyes fluttered. Its chirps had faded into silence. It no longer called out. It no longer expected an answer. Somewhere deep within its fragile mind, a simple understanding began to form. It had been left. It had been rejected. It had been born wrongs. Night fell. Stars appeared, countless, cold, distant. The temperature dropped further, biting into the hatchling's small body. Its movements had slowed to almost nothing, its breathing barely perceptible. The wind howled softly, reshaping the dunes, erasing tracks, burying signs of life. The hatchling lay still, waiting for what it did not know. Perhaps for the desert to decide. And then, a sound, faint at first, unfamiliar. A low, distant rumble that did not belong to the natural rhythms of Karis. The hatchling's eyes flickered open. Far across the dunes, something moved. Not like the wind. Not like a predator. Something different. A shape broke the horizon, silhouetted against the fading light. It grew larger, accompanied by that strange, continuous rumble. The hatchling did not understand what it was. But it was something. Something that did not belong to the desert. Something new. And as the last of its strength faded, as its vision dimmed once more, the pale hatchling watched that distant shape approach. Unaware that, for the first time since its birth, the desert had not been the only thing watching it. The man who stopped. Ilias Ward hated the Karis route. He had hated it the first time he drove it. He had hated it the 100th time, and he was fairly certain he would hate it until the day he finally signed off his last contract and left desert hauling behind for good. The pay was the only reason anyone took the route. Hazard bonuses stacked quickly out here, extreme environment compensation, isolation premiums, equipment risk allowances. On paper, it made perfect sense. A few weeks on Karis could earn what safer routes paid in months. But numbers didn't capture what it felt like. Endless dunes. No landmarks. No cities. No traffic. Just sand and silence stretching in every direction until the world itself felt empty. Ilias leaned back in his seat, one hand loosely gripping the control yoke as the rover cut through the desert. The vehicle hummed steadily beneath him, its reinforced chassis absorbing the uneven terrain as easily as a ship crossing calm water. Outside, the landscape rolled past in waves of gold. Inside, everything was climate-controlled, filtered, optimized. The cockpit smelled faintly of recycled air and machine oil. Soft displays glowed across the dashboard, feeding him a constant stream of data, temperature, wind speed, system integrity, navigation markers. Everything he needed to survive. Everything he needed to stay inside. He preferred it that way. Most drivers did. The cardinal rule of Karis hauling was simple. You do not stop. Stopping meant exposure, exposure meant risk, and risk out here had a way of escalating faster than anyone expected. A stalled engine could become a death sentence. A sudden storm could bury a vehicle in minutes. Even stepping outside too long could drain hydration reserves beyond recovery. So drivers kept moving. They watched their instruments. They trusted their routes. And they ignored everything else. Ilias had followed that rule for years. Mostly. The rover crested another dune, its engine adjusting automatically as it climbed, then descended with controlled precision. Fine sand sprayed outward from its wheels, catching the sunlight in shimmering arcs. Ilias barely noticed. He had long since stopped trying to find meaning in the scenery. Out here, everything looked the same. Every dune blended into the next, every horizon mirrored the last. It was like driving through a painting that never changed. He glanced at the navigation display. Another 6 hours to the next relay point. He exhaled slowly. Just another run, he muttered. The words sounded flat even to him. The comm system crackled softly, then settled back into silence. No other drivers on this route today, no chatter, no distractions. Just him and the desert. The alert tone broke the monotony. A soft chime barely noticeable, but out here, even the smallest deviation mattered. Elias straightened slightly, his eyes shifting to the forward display. All right, what now? A new marker blinked into existence on the screen. Heat signature detected. He frowned. That wasn't unusual, strictly speaking. The desert was full of heat differentials, rocks, shifting sand layers, occasional wildlife. But this one was small. Very small. And it was isolated. Elias tapped a control, expanding the sensor feed. The display zoomed in, refining the data. Temperature reading elevated. Movement minimal. Classification unknown. He leaned closer, studying it. Probably debris, he said to himself. Metal fragments sometimes retained heat longer than the surrounding sand. A piece of wreckage maybe, or some kind of sensor glitch. Or a dying animals. That happened too. Creatures wandered out of their territory sometimes, got lost, got injured, and ended up baking under the sun until there was nothing left. It wasn't his concern. It couldn't be. Elias leaned back again, his hand tightening slightly on the controls. Not my problems. He nudged the rover's speed up a fraction, letting the autopilot maintain course. The marker drifted toward the edge of the display as he moved past it. Just another anomaly. Just another thing to ignore. He lasted exactly 3 seconds. Elias exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. Damn it. His hand moved before he could stop himself, adjusting the controls, disengaging the strict autopilot path. The rover responded immediately, its course shifting as it angled toward the heat signature. One look, he said, as if saying it out loud made it a rule. That's it, one look and I'm gone. He had said that before. It never really worked. The rover climbed a higher dune, its sensors recalibrating as it approached the source of the anomaly. Sand cascaded down the slope as the vehicle reached the crest. And then, there it was. Elias blinked. Wells, you're new. At first, it barely looked like anything. Just a small shape, half buried in the sand, pale against the gold. Too pale. Even at a distance, it stood out. The rover rolled to a stop a short distance away, its engine idling softly. Elias stared through the reinforced glass, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It wasn't debris. It wasn't a rock. It was alive. Barely. He hesitated. This was exactly the kind of situation the rules were meant to prevent. Unknown wildlife. Unpredictable behavior. Potential contamination. Possible territorial response from nearby species. Every training manual he had ever read told him the same thing. Do not engage. Observe if necessary. Report. Move on. Elias sighed. Yeah, not happenings. The moment he opened the rover's door, the desert hit him. Heat slammed into his body, even through the protective layers of his suit. The air was dry, harsh, carrying fine particles of sand that stung against exposed surfaces. The wind whispered across the dunes, shifting grains in constant motion. Elias stepped down carefully, his boots sinking slightly into the soft surface. Quick, he muttered in and outs. He adjusted his visor, shielding his eyes as he approached the shape. Up close, it looked even worse. The creature was small, no larger than his forearm, and almost entirely buried in sand. Only part of its body was visible, its pale scales coated in a thin layer of dust. It wasn't moving. For a moment, Elias thought he might be too late. Then, faintly, a twitch. A small, weak movement. Alive. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. He crouched slowly, careful not to cast too large a shadow over it. Hey there, he said, his voice softer now. The creature didn't react at first. Then after a moment, its eyes flickered open. Violet. Not gold. Not ambers. Violet. Elias blinked. Okay, definitely not standard. The creature made a faint sound, a soft, broken chirp that barely carried over the wind. It didn't try to run. Didn't try to hide. It just looked at him. Or maybe it didn't even have the strength for that. When that hit harder than anything else. Elias had seen fear before. Animals bolted, they hissed, snapped, fled at the first sign of something unfamiliar. Even injured ones tried to defend themselves, even if it was hopeless. This one didn't. It couldn't. It was too weak to be afraid. Elias exhaled slowly. Yes, I know that look. He didn't realize he had said it out loud until the words were already gone. He reached out, then paused. Rules. Protocols. Consequences. If the company found out, he'd be written up at best. Fined, maybe. Suspension if someone decided to make an example of him. Interference with native ecosystems wasn't taken lightly. There were reasons for that. Good reasons. But none of those reasons were lying half dead in the sand in front of him. Elias closed his eyes briefly. Just this once, he said. It was never just once. He slipped off his outer glove, exposing his bare hand to the filtered air inside the suit's microclimate layer. Carefully, slowly, he brushed the sand away from the creature. Its body was warm. Too warm. The heat wasn't just environmental, it was internal. Dehydration, stress, maybe even organ strain. It was close. Too close. Easy, he murmured. The creature made another faint sound as he uncovered more of it, its small limbs shifting weakly. Elias slid his hands beneath it, supporting its body as gently as he could. It weighed almost nothing. Fragile, breakable. For a moment he just held it there, studying it. The color was wrong. Completely wrong. Everything about it stood out, its pale scales, its bright eyes. It was the exact opposite of what something out here should be. And that meant only one thing. This wasn't an accident, Elias said quietly. It hadn't wandered out here. It hadn't gotten lost. It had been left. The realization settled heavily. Elias had seen enough of the galaxy to recognize the pattern. Different, unfit, a risk. Some species called their weak. Others abandoned them. Let nature take the responsibility. Cleaner that way. Less direct. Less guilt. Elias looked down at the small creature in his hands. Yeah, he said softly, I know that one too. The wind picked up slightly, carrying more sand across the dune. Elias glanced back at the rover. Time. He didn't have much of it. Every second outside increased the risk. Every delay pushed his schedule further off track. He should put the creature back. Log the coordinates. Report it. Drive on. That was the correct decision. The responsible decision. The professional decision. He tightened his grip just slightly. No, he said. Elias stood, cradling the creature carefully against his chest. Guess you're riding with me. The words were simple. Casual, but the decision behind them was. He turned and made his way back to the rover, each step deliberate, protective. The creature shifted faintly in his hands, its head tilting just enough to press against the warmth of his suit. Not resistance. Not fear. Just instinct. Seeking heat. Seeking safety. Elias swallowed. Yeah, all right, he muttered. We'll figure it out. The rover door sealed behind him with a soft hiss. Instantly, the harshness of the desert faded, replaced by controlled air and stable temperature. Elias moved quickly, setting the creature down on the passenger seat. No, not theirs. He grabbed a thermal blanket from the emergency kit, wrapping it loosely around the small body. Let's see what we've got. His hands moved with practiced efficiency now, pulling up the med scanner, adjusting settings for non-human biology. The device hummed softly as it passed over the creature. Readings flashed across the screen. Hydration critical. Core temperature elevated. Metabolic activity unstable. Elias grimaced. Yeah, you were about an hour from Dunn's. He reached for a hydration pack, carefully applying a small amount of fluid along the creature's mouth. Izzy, don't choke. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a slight movement. A weak response. Elias exhaled. Good, that's good. The creature's eyes opened again more slowly this time. They focused barely but enough. On him. On the warmth. On the presence that wasn't leaving. It made a small sound. Softer now. Less desperate. Elias leaned back in his seat watching it. Yeah, I'm still here. He restarted the rover, the engine humming back to life as the vehicle adjusted its course. The heat signature marker disappeared from the display, replaced by nothing, as if the desert had already forgotten. But inside the rover, wrapped in a thermal blanket, breathing just a little stronger than before, something remained. The creature didn't understand what had happened. It didn't understand the machine, the movement, the strange environment. But it understood one thing. It was no longer alone. The warmth surrounding it wasn't fading. The presence beside it wasn't leaving. And for the first time since its birth, it felt something new. Not rejection, not abandonment, not the cold indifference of the desert. Something else, something steady, something safe, warmth. And as the rover disappeared into the endless dunes, carrying its unexpected passenger across a world that had already cast it aside, the desert watched. But this time, it was not the only thing that had chosen to see what humans keep. The Sarathi had rules. Strict ones. They were not written in symbols or etched into stone. They lived in memory, in instinct, in the quiet certainty passed from one generation to the next. Every elder knew them. Every hatchling grew into them. They were simple. Survival above all. The desert demanded it. Karis was not a forgiving world. It did not bend, did not compromise, did not allow for error. Those who failed to adapt were not corrected, they were erased. So the Sarathi adapted. Over time, they became efficient, precise, calculated. Emotion had its place, but never above survival. Anything that threatened the brood was removed. Anything that could draw predators, waste resources, or weaken the collective was handled. Not with cruelty, but with certainty. Efficiency over hesitation. Always. That was how they had endured. That was why they were still alive. The dunes shifted under a burning sun. Weeks had passed since the pale hatchling had been taken from the brood and left to the judgment of the desert. The winds had long since erased its tracks. The sands had reshaped themselves, smoothing away any sign that it had ever existed. To the Sarathi, it was gone. Decided. Finished. There was no need to speak of it. No need to remember. The desert had made its judgment. The brood continued as it always had. Hatchlings trained beneath the sand, learning to move, to burrow, to hide. Elders patrolled the outer tunnels, monitoring temperature shifts, tracking vibrations, ensuring that no predator or rival encroached too close. Life went on. Order remained. And yet, something had changed. Subtle but present. The heat had grown harsher. The sun lingered longer each cycle, its intensity pushing deeper into the dunes. Even the lower tunnels, once stable and cool, began to warm beyond their usual thresholds. The elders noticed. They always did. We must dig deeper, one said. The lower layers hold less stability, another replied. Collapse risk increases. Then we reinforce. And expend more energy. Better that than exposure. The discussions repeated cycle after cycle. Adjustments were made. Strategies revised. But the pattern remained. The desert was changing. And not in their favors. On the surface, the dunes shimmered under the relentless sun. Most of the brood remained below during peak heat, conserving energy, avoiding unnecessary exposure. Only the watchers stayed near the upper layers, their senses attuned to vibrations in the sand. It was one of those watchers who felt it first. A tremor, faint, unfamiliar, not the shifting of dunes, Not the movement of prey. Something heavier, rhythmic, mechanical. The watcher stilled, pressing its body deeper into the sand, focusing. The vibration grew stronger. Approaching. Not a predator. Not a storm. Something else. Something remembered. The watcher retreated quickly, sending signals through the tunnels. Alert. Unknown presence. Approaching the brood. The response was immediate. Elders moved to the surface, their bodies coiling just beneath the sand, ready to strike if necessary. Younger Sarathi were ushered deeper, away from potential danger. They emerged cautiously, their golden scales blending seamlessly with the dunes as they rose just enough to observe. The horizon shimmered. And then, they saw it. A shape, large, angular, moving against the wind. It did not glide like a creature or flow like the dunes. It cut through them. A machine. The same kind that had crossed their territory before, rare, but not unknown. Dangerous but not immediately hostile. Unpredictable. The elders watched, their bodies tense. Why had it come here? The machine slowed. That in itself was unusual. These things rarely stopped. They crossed the desert in straight lines, ignoring everything that did not threaten them. But this one changed course. It moved toward the brood's territory. And then, it stopped. The elders shifted, unease rippling through them. The machine was close. Too close. The sand trembled faintly as it settled, its engine humming softly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a section of its side opened. And something stepped out. The humans. The Sarathi had encountered humans before. Rarely. Briefly. They were strange creatures, soft, unscaled, exposed to the elements in ways that made little sense. Yet they moved with confidence, protected by tools and machines that compensated for their physical limitations. They were not to be underestimated. The elders watched as the human descended onto the sand, its movements careful, deliberate. Its posture was different. Not aggressive. Not submissive. Open. Hands visible. Body relaxed. It knew it was being watched. And then, something else moved. From behind the humans. Small, low to the ground. Familiar. The elders froze. It stepped into the sunlight. White. Impossible. The albino hatchling stood at the edge of the dune, its pale scales catching the light in a way that made it seem almost luminous. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The desert itself seemed to still. It was alive. Not only alive. Thriving. The hatchling was larger now, its movement steady, its body strong. Where once it had trembled, it now stood with quiet stability. Its limbs no longer faltered, its breathing no longer strained. And its eyes. Those same violet eyes. No longer dimmed by weakness. They burned with clarity. With awareness. With something new. Confidence. The brood stirred. Confusion spread through them like a ripple in still water. It should not be here. It should not exist. The desert had decided. Had it not? The hatchling took a step forward. Not hesitating. Not hiding. It did not attempt to blend into the sand. It did not lower itself in submission. It simply stood. Visible. Unafraid. The elders rose slightly higher from the dunes, their golden forms breaking the surface just enough to be seen. A low hiss passed between them. Uncertainty. Calculation. This was wrong. This was unknown. Behind the hatchling, the human stepped forward. Elias Ward moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible, his posture relaxed. He had learned through observation, through careful trial, that sudden movements triggered defensive responses. Calm was safer. Predictable. He stopped a short distance away, giving space. Respecting boundaries. All right, he said, his voice carrying across the still air. Let's try this the easy way. The Sarathi did not respond. But they listened. Elias glanced down at the hatchling. Well, he muttered softly, this is your family. The hatchling flicked its gaze toward him briefly, then back to the brood. It did not retreat. Elias exhaled, then looked back at the gathered elders. They kicked you out, he said, nodding toward the hatchling. Figured you were a problem. A ripple of movement passed through the Sarasi. They understood tone, if not words. They understood intent. And yeah, Elias continued, I get it. You've got a system, rules, survival. He gestured toward the dunes. Not exactly a forgiving place. The elders remained still. Watching, Elias tilted his head slightly. But here's the thing, he said, you were wrong. The reaction was immediate. A sharper hiss. A shift in posture. Not quite aggressions, but close. The hatchling moved. Just a single step forward, positioning itself slightly ahead of Elias. Not shielding him. Not confronting the brood. But standing. Between. Elias blinked. Then slowly he smiled. Yeah, he murmured, that's new. He looked back at the elders. You saw something different, he said, and you assumed it meant weak. He gestured toward the hatchling again. Turns out you were just built different. The hatchling lifted its head slightly. The sunlight struck its scales fully now. And instead of glaring harshly, instead of exposing it, the light seemed to scatter, reflect, diffuse. The white surface shimmered not like something fragile, but like something resilient. Elias tapped a control on his wrist. The rover responded instantly. A panel slid open and a small projector extended outward, casting a series of images into the air between them. Graphs, readings, visual data. The Sarathi did not understand the symbols, but they understood patterns. Comparisons. Results. Elias pointed. Temperature absorption, he said, indicating one set of data. Yours spikes fast. He shifted to another. Yours plateaus. Another. Critical thresholds, you hit them early. He gestured toward the hatchling. This one doesn't. The elders leaned forward slightly, their attention fixed. In the middle of the day, Elias continued, when you're forced underground, this one can stay out. He pointed toward the open desert. Where you have to hide, this one can move. He lowered his hand. Where you're limited, this one is. The wind stirred, carrying fine grains of sand between them. The desert's getting hotter, Elias said quietly, you know that. The elders shifted. They did know. You've been adapting, he continued, digging deeper, changing patterns. He met their gaze. But that only works for so long. Silence stretched. Heavy, thoughtful. Elias glanced at the hatchling again. You almost threw away your best shot at adapting, he said. The words hung in the air. The brood shifted uneasily. The idea was uncomfortable. Their rules had kept them alive. Their decisions had been correct. Hadn't they? The hatchling stepped forward again. Further this time. Closer to the brood. No one stopped it. It moved onto the open sand, fully exposed to the sun. No cover. No attempt to hide. The heat shimmered around it. But it did not falter. One of the younger Sarathi flinched, pulling back slightly from the surface. The temperature was rising. Too much. The hatchling remained. Steady. Unaffected. The difference was undeniable. The elders watched. Calculating. Reevaluating. The desert had changed. And perhaps, so had the definition of survival. The hatchling turned. Back toward Elias. For a moment the world seemed to narrow. Humans. Alien. Two beings from entirely different worlds. Standing in the middle of a desert that belonged to neither and both. Elias smiled. Soft. Genuine. Your choice, kid. He did not move closer. Did not reach out. Did not call it back. He had already made his choice. Weeks ago. On a dune where something small and fragile had been left to die. Now, it was the hatchling's turn. It looked at the brood. The tunnels beneath the sand. The place it had been born. The place that had rejected it. It looked at the desert. Endless. Unforgiving. Beautiful. And then, it looked at the humans. The one who had stopped. The one who had stayed. The one who had seen something worth keeping. The hatchling took a step. Forward. Not toward the dunes. Not back to where it had been left. But into something new. Not as an outcast. Not as a mistake. But as something else. Something chosen. The elders did not stop it. They watched, learning, adapting, as they always had. Because survival was not just about holding on to what had worked. It was about recognizing what could. And sometimes, what looked like a weakness was the beginning of something stronger. Elias exhaled slowly, watching as the hatchling moved with quiet certainty. Yeah, he murmured, that sounds about right. The wind carried his voice across the dunes. And for the first time in a long time, the desert did not feel quite so empty. Because sometimes, in a universe that discards the different, it takes a human to stop, to look closer, to ignore the rules that say leave it, and to choose, to keep what others throw away. Not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because it matters. And out here in the endless dunes of Karis, that choice changed everything.